Good afternoon. On behalf of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, I'd like to welcome you to the OJJDP Training and Technical Assistance Network event, Data, Trends, and Gender-Responsive Approaches with Girls. My name is Linda Rosen, and I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Specialist with OJJDP. As you're aware, OJJDP has 44 training and technical assistance provider organizations delivering 60-plus projects that serve the juvenile justice field. Today you'll hear from two of our projects, the National Gang Center, operated by the Institute of Intergovernmental Research, and the National Girls Institute, operated by the National Council on Crime and Delinquency. These events are designed to help us learn from one another, continue networking, and think of new ways to collaborate and do more with less. If your project needs additional support from the office or from our Training and Technical Assistance Center, I hope you won't hesitate to let us know. Your key liaison is our host and moderator today, Michelle Duhart-Tong, who is the OJJDP NTTAC TNTA Network Provider Lead. Michelle?
Thank you, Linda. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As your host and moderator, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of Adobe Connect, which will help you maximize your opportunity to participate in today's webinar. To view the bios and photos of our panel, please access the PDF document, which is available now in the handouts pod of the webinar dashboard. To send a chat message to me, your host, a panelist, or another attendee, click the menu icon in the upper right corner of the chat pod, which is number 1. Choose Start Chat With, then select Host, Presenter, or Specific Attendees. The second arrow allows you to type your message into the text box, and number 3, you can hit Enter or click the message bubble icon to send. Most of you are very familiar with this format. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the name of the person registered and total number of additional people in the room with you today. This will help us with our final count. Again, if you're viewing with a number of people today, a larger group, type in the name of the person registered and the number of additional people joining you today. There will be a few opportunities for Q&A throughout the presentation today. As questions arise, please send them to me, your host, to share with the panelists, or simply type them in the chat window. During that time, we will take every opportunity to address some of the questions you've posed during the presentation. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to take a 5-minute online survey about today's presentation. We appreciate your feedback regarding this webinar. This information is used to assist OJJDP in the future planning and training. You will be able to access the evaluation link on the last slide of the PowerPoint. For those of you who are joining as a group, when you return to your office, please enter the link on the last slide in your web browser to share your feedback. And finally, this event will be archived in OJJDP's Training Center at www.ntac.org in approximately 2 weeks. Again, thank you for joining us today. So, as your host today, I'm excited. We've got a small but very intimate crowd. There are about 10 of you, and here are the objectives that we'll cover during the hour. You'll have the National Girls Institute. We'll spend a couple of minutes talking with you about understanding some of the current research and data around justice-involved girls. And Ms. Del Prado-Lippman will also touch upon the awareness of the need to provide TNTA on girls' gender and culturally responsive services in girls' programming. The National Gang Center will talk about current research on the extent of females' involvement in gangs, as well as discuss gender differences and risk factors for joining a gang. So there you have it for the next 55 minutes. Okay? So our first presenter, I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Del Prado-Lippman, who is the project manager for the National Girls Institute, as well as a research associate with the National Council on Crime and Delinquency. Angie currently manages several projects at NCCD, including a Bureau of Justice Assistance funded project on immigrant parents and law enforcement promoting community safety, and a research study funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, called Girls and Gangs, Improving our Understanding and Ability to Respond. She has also worked on community violence prevention efforts targeting gang violence. Angie?
Hi, thank you, Michelle. Okay. Did not mean to do that. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me to join today. And I am going to start to talk about trends in girls' arrest and detention. Since the mid-1990s, we've seen arrests for youth have generally decreased. Between 2000 and 2009, we've seen a 17% drop. What is interesting and concerning is that the trend for the numbers of girls are rising. Today, girls represent 1/3 of all juvenile arrests, and they are the fastest growing segment of the juvenile justice system. From 2002 to 2011, the number of males arrested declined 11%, while the numbers of females arrested rose 5.8%. And so when we look at offenses like vandalism and drug abuse violations, the decrease in arrests have really been smaller for girls than boys. And offenses that include simple arrest and disorderly conduct, girls' numbers have increased while boys continue to drop. So what we see typically are that girls are being arrested for low-level and nonviolent offenses and disproportionately detained for technical violations or status offenses. And when I say technical violations, that could include a failure to attend school or counseling, a failure to pay a court fee, a curfew violation, a failure to pass a drug test. And a status offense can include anything from a truancy violation to running away or possessing alcohol or tobacco. And although status offenses and technical violations are non-serious and non-violent offenses, they often lead girls and young women to be enmeshed in the juvenile justice system. And often this is due to a lack of appropriate community-based alternatives. So in a one-day snapshot, these low-level offenses accounted for less than 1/5 of boys' detentions, but 1/3 of girls. So what's impacting these rising numbers? If we know from the research that girls tend to fight with family members more than boys do, and family-related disagreements are often a pathway into the juvenile justice system. Girls appear to be disparately affected by the application of domestic violence arrests and laws, which are present in many states. So while research in this area is pretty limited, one study found that over a 5-year period, girls were more likely to be arrested for assault against their parents than boys. The second thing that we see impacting the rising numbers of girls is criminalization of child exploitation. So girls who are involved in prostitution are victims and have often been recruited by pimps. They typically have histories of trauma and needs and services, and they need services rather than arrest or incarceration. And then finally, we see this overprotection of girls, the societal notion that girls might need to be, are often arrested more to protect them from running away or to detain girls to provide services. In the system, girls are reporting having different experiences than boys. In general, girls are more likely to receive harsher sanctions for low-level offenses, and they are lacking appropriate programming and services. We're really seeing the need to recognize the diversity and intersectionality of girls, and that's something that we are hearing more and more about. One study that examined differences between Black, Hispanic, and white girls found that Black and Hispanic girls had a higher likelihood of receiving probation rather than non-judicial judgments than white girls, with Black girls' odds being 88% higher. We are hearing from LGBTQ girls that they're interacting with staff who assume they're heterosexual. And we're finding out that pregnant girls are lacking critical access to health care services. Most juvenile justice residential facilities, there's a report, about 85% reported that some girls receive care from a gynecologist, often, quote, as necessary, and based on self-reports of sexual activity or suspected pregnancy. So I think we're seeing that these girls may not be getting the critical health care that they need. And we understand that the pathways for girls are really unique. the girls in the juvenile justice system are experiencing trauma. It may be sexual assaulted or raped, abused emotionally, physically, or sexually, or exposed to community violence. While estimates vary, there are numerous studies that indicate the percentage of justice-involved girls who have experienced trauma ranges anywhere from 70 to 90%. And these girls may often turn to substance use to cope with their trauma, which can lead to further justice involvement. We're understanding that family issues are a risk factor, bringing more and more girls into the JJ system. Family chaos, family criminality, abuse, and neglect. All of these factors can lead girls to running away from home and subsequently being arrested. A lack of pro-social peers may promote further involvement in delinquent activities. And finally, academic issues that include school failure and suspension or girls being expelled are impacting this influx into the system. And we see that protective factors for girls' delinquency include increased school attachment and parental attachment and family connections. At the federal and the state level, attention is now being paid to the increased number of girls coming into the system. Federal legislation has been modified, and some state legislation has been passed in Connecticut, Florida, Hawaii, Minnesota, and Oregon. So we're really seeing now that research is being funded, and awareness of the need for gender-responsive programming is really growing.
And Angie, the first poll question, I apologize, there's not a slide for it, and we'll want you all to respond in the chat window. What issues and needs are you seeing in your training and TA requests as it relates to girls? So for those of you who are joining us today, if you are getting some requests in for your project around girls' issues, what are those issues? What are some of the needs that are being asked for from the field? What are you seeing? Send your responses in the chat window. Let us know what's coming in through your door, through your email, through your website. Don't all respond at once. Back at you, Angie.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, thank you. And I'm not seeing anything pop up. What we're seeing at NGI is, training and TA needs that cover a range of topics, including gender-responsive curricula within girl differences, well-being of LGBT youth, creating culturally competent programs, and trauma-informed care. So we're seeing all kinds of issues that are coming up. And this is poll number 2. What is your organization's current experience related to girls? So I think you can click on what your current experience is, just so we can kind of get an idea of what your work is and what may resonate with you. So I see receiving TTA requests related to girls' issues and needs. Thank you. 1. Anyone else? All right, I will continue. Oh, 2 people. Okay. So you're receiving TTA requests related to girls' issues. Thank you. That's it? Okay, I'm going to continue. So I know this is a very long definition, but there seems to be several iterations of this floating around in the field, and this is one that is most widely used, and it's put forth by some of the pioneers in the field for gender-responsive work. And it defines that work as creating an environment through site selection, staff selection, program development, content, and material, which all reflects an understanding of the realities of women's lives and addresses their issues. So gender-responsive approaches are multidimensional, based on theoretical perspectives, and really address all of these factors that intersect together. And they address issues that include abuse and violence, family relationships, substance use, and co-occurring disorders, and really provides all of that through a lens of strength-based approaches, and all the while emphasizing skill building and self-efficacy. Gender-responsive programming for girls acknowledges that the majority of assessments and programming and services were designed for boys. We know that girls enter the system with significant issues that include mental health needs, physical health problems, substance use issues, trauma experiences, family dysfunction, school problems, and developmental differences. And gender-responsive programming responds to these needs that are unique and these challenges of girls. And gender-responsive programming honors within girl differences. So while girls as a group share some similar traits, gender-responsive programming really acknowledges that there's significant differences as well. And it's very important to understand that girls have multiple and overlapping identities and statuses, which must be honored and recognized. So some promising elements of girls' programming will include assessments that measure girls' strengths, opportunities to build therapeutic or helping alliances, and incorporate gender-responsive cognitive behavioral approaches. They will include interventions that support girls in developing positive connections and relationships, and encompass programs that acknowledge within girl differences. So this is my last slide, and we wanted to highlight a program for girls that was deemed promising by OJJDP, and this is Movimiento Ascendencia, which is a prevention program based in Pueblo, California. And this program provides opportunities for girls to build a therapeutic or helping alliance. And it supports girls in developing positive connections and relationships through parental involvement, while acknowledging within girl differences. In the evaluation that was conducted, girls in the treatment group in this program showed a greater reduction in delinquency than girls in the control group during the pre- and post-program periods. So this program was rated as promising by OJJDP. And it includes all of the activities, case management, mentoring, tutoring, and homework support, gender-specific life skills, and parental involvement. But we wanted to highlight that. And if you would like more information, that program is part of included in this OJJDP Model Programs Guide, and then you can visit our website, which is National.
Thank you, Angie. I appreciate that. You know, it's nothing like being impromptu on a rainy Friday afternoon. So, you know, we're going to take this opportunity to ask you a few questions since we received a few for you, and not wait till the end. So, a few questions which you should be able to answer. First of all, talk about some of your core services and activities that the National Growth Institute actually provides for the juvenile justice field.
Okay, I will do my best. So NGI convened over 600 stakeholders to gather information about how to improve the response of the J system for girls. So there were 64 focus groups and 16 small group interviews, and the findings that emerged from that listening sessions report continue to inform our work and provide guidance for developing training and TA opportunities for staff who work with girls. So we did that, and we continue to do training and technical assistance. And then something very exciting that we just did in May is we were able to convene scholars and researchers and direct service professionals to come together for a full day to talk about the dissension and alignment between evidence-based practice and gender-responsive programming. And it was very exciting and interesting to have the panel that was present to really talk about and focus on areas of dissent and agreement between these two approaches. We also do webinars, and we're right now in the process of updating our website and creating more communications deliverables that are going out to, including newsletters and briefs. So we're really trying to flood the field with translating research to practice and help as many direct service professionals as we can.
Thank you, Angie. Excellent. Yes, it certainly did. One other question I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask the same question of the National Girls Center, the National Gang Center as well. But what percentage of girls in the JJ system report? I'm sorry, that's not the question I want to ask. Is there any particular new data out there that law enforcement should be paying particular attention to?
You know, that is a really good question, and we have been looking for a really good answer for that, and I don't know if my counterparts maybe have something else to share with that, because we had a hard time finding out if there was any recent data within the past 2 years for law enforcement.
Okay, not a problem. If something comes up, just let us know towards the end. But I know law enforcement always wants to know if there's anything new on the horizon or anything new that you're experiencing that is problematic for girls that they should be aware of. So with that, let's move on to our next presentation panel. Thank you so much, Angie. And we'll have more opportunities to ask questions of the National Girls Institute at the end. Now we want to turn our attention to the National Gang Center, and we're going to hear from Mina Harris as well as from Arlen Egley, Dr. Arlen Egley. Dr. Egley is a member of the National Gang Center team and is primarily responsible for administering and managing all aspects of the National Youth Gang Survey, including preparing the survey instrument, data collection, management, and analysis of the survey data, drafting and presenting the reports, and performing other tasks supporting gang-related surveys. Mina Harris is the director of the National Gang Center and senior research associate for the Institute for Intergovernmental Research. Mina currently supervises the Gang Programs Group, which includes the National Gang Center, operated for the U.S. Department of Justice, OJJDP, and the DOJ Bureau of Justice Assistance, and the Gang Resistance Education and Training National Program Office, for which the Institute for IIR provides administrative and logistical support. So, Mina Harris, take it away.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for inviting us to this webinar. That was a mouthful there, wasn't it? So the National Gang Center, as you said, it's a training and technical assistant project funded jointly by OJJDP and BJA, the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And we provide a variety of online and on-site products and services that support gang prevention, gang intervention, and gang suppression efforts. We monitor existing and emerging street gang trends through the National Youth Gang Survey and through our work out in the field in our training and technical assistance. And then for OJJDP, we serve as their expert resource on gang-related topics and aspects of their services. And that's what I wanted to tell you. And during the chat, I'll pull up some helpful or useful web links to our site. So now let me turn it over to Arlen, and he can talk about the subset of girls who are gang involved.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Arlen Egley. I work at the National Gang Center on the survey, but before that I worked in juvenile justice, so I wanted to take a moment to recognize and appreciate all the work that everyone's doing in juvenile justice. I was a juvenile officer in the state of Missouri and worked with status offenders, and I know how unglamorous that and unrecognized that is. So I always take the opportunity to acknowledge when the people that are involved in this part of the field of criminology and criminal justice. When I was about 20 years ago, I started attending graduate school at the University of Missouri, and one of the things that I quickly learned is, one, we had a faculty full of gang professors in St. Louis, and one of the things that, no matter what kind of research they did, the findings that they presented were always related to violence in gangs, especially inner city gangs in St. Louis. And in fact, over time, this finding in criminology has is a near truism, really, that gangs equal crime. Gangs are so much involved in crime disproportionately that they warrant their own specialty. They warrant their own focus, especially serious and violent crime. And I think this overlaps nicely with what Angie was talking about in girls programs and crime rates. We want to look at also at the Gang Center. We want to bridge or look at that gap overlay between girls, gangs, and crime, because if we know, next slide, please. Sorry. I know I'm not supposed to say that. One of the participants today is Buddy Howe. He also works for the Gang Center, and he led this study that I helped out with too as well. And we looked at gang crime in the biggest cities across the United States, all of the biggest cities. And what we found is that gangs account for 20 to 40% of homicides within the past decade in these cities. That's on average. In some cities it's very low, some cities it's higher, like Chicago and LA, which you often see in the news right now. 20 to 40% obviously is a big number, and gangs contributing to that is one of the things we wouldn't have known at a national scale without some sort of effort to measure gang membership and gang violence rates on a national scale. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we only had hit or miss various surveys. Sorry, I'm getting a message. So what we want to look at is the females in the context of gangs, that not only the contribution to violence that gangs have, but also the consequences of participating in a gang lifestyle. And what the emerging research is showing, especially over the last 10, 15 years, is that being part of a gang negatively impacts a lot of the factors that we know that people settle into in life, what they're called the informal social control mechanisms: getting married, getting a job, the stability of life, transitioning to a stable adulthood. Just a small amount of time in a gang can have significant impact, and that's why gangs, and especially girls in gangs, is an important topic from our perspective, is because this disrupts and in some cases extends this successful transition to adulthood. So there are two different ways to I need to get, well, what are the benefits? Oh, can I get back? Kelly has a question. No, I'll take it now. I like it. There are a lot of negative impacts of the gang involvement, but what are the benefits? And that's usually what researchers like to do, is measure what people expect to get out of the gang. And a lot of times, you know, I'm thinking of Jody Miller's comment. Excuse me?
We can answer questions at the end.
Oh, okay. I'll come back to that. Law enforcement is one source of data for information about females in gangs, and that would include our survey here, the National Gang Survey, and also various states, but not all states, have their own statewide survey. Mina was involved in the statewide survey for Florida, and I know there are some other states that participate and collect their own data as well about gang involvement from law enforcement. But a second source that we learn a great deal more of information about the youth participation in gangs are through student surveys. And this includes the very well-known causes and correlate studies, which has brought us a wealth of information about crime, criminology, gender, ethnicity, all of the correlates and factors that precipitate crime throughout the United States. And the three principal cities in that, and the causes and correlates are Pittsburgh, Rochester, New York, and Denver, Colorado. There's also the GREAT survey evaluation. It's actually two different evaluations. There was an evaluation in the 90s, and now there's a second called GREAT 2 evaluation. We've learned a wealth of information about gangs from those evaluations, which is 5,000 to 6,000 kids that they collect information from. Carl Hill's Social Development Project in Seattle, and then the ongoing representative sample of the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. So when we look at data from law enforcement, they have, in the beginning, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, law enforcement, a lot of them said as a matter of policy they didn't recognize girls as gang members. That's changed somewhat over the years in that over the last decade and a half, they mentioned and put register, I guess is the word, females into their gang database. But if we look at that in terms of proportion, it's still about 9-to-1 male, which is in some areas that, especially the newer gang problem areas where the gang members recognized by law enforcement tend to be younger, that they've had a gang problem for the last half decade to a decade, they report slightly greater percentage of female members, but it's still outweighed by males. But if you look at self-report surveys, they typically show between 1/4 to 1/3, a couple of studies that even show high 30s of percentage of females that join, a percentage of people that join a gang are female. And this, of course, contrasts with the official records from law enforcement. And that brings us to our first poll question. What, in your experience...
Michelle, are you going to tell us the poll question? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, Sabrina says, where does the data come from? Law enforcement. It's from. Well, for our survey, we sample over 2,500 law enforcement agencies across the United States. That if you're familiar with the Uniform Crime Reports, which was collected by the FBI, they collect data from 15,000 law enforcement agencies. We select a smaller group of those, although it includes all of the biggest cities where we know gang activity is concentrated. And so from a law enforcement perspective, we're gathering the data that they have in their database, and we collect this annually, and that's why we had presented years over time to show, you know, just one measurement in time would only give us a snapshot, and we want to look at what's evolving over time in terms of police's recognition of female involvement in gangs. I see that everyone cracked the code, that it's not one source is better, it's that they're offering two different perspectives of the same problem, especially youth surveys that... I'll come back to that. Law enforcement typically looks at older members. In fact, some of them departments do not record juveniles at all as gang members, only adults. They primarily come into contact with older long-term members, and especially what are law enforcement most concerned about anyway is crime, so it's the ones that are most criminally active, which tend to be the males in the gang. That doesn't mean females don't join the gangs, it's just offering an explanation why males show up more often in police gang databases. Away already. Females join and leave the gangs at a more rapid rate. That's something that's been shown through the survey research. That although females and males join around the same time, the average sequence is 11, 12 years old, start associating more and more with the gang, and by 13, 14 join the gang. Males and females do this at about the same rate, except females do it at a faster pace, meaning that they join and then leave the gang faster than the males do. And this could be linked, and this would be, part of the discussion for the whole group. This could be linked to females' tendency to mature faster than males, and therefore they exit the gang at a faster rate than males. I'm going to skip over these because
Angie spoke about them.
Yes. I will focus on the juvenile court cases, though, because when we like Angie mentioned about official crime statistics, about arrest records, well, that naturally impacts juvenile court cases, which is the second part of our criminal justice system, the third being corrections. And so in the court cases, over the past, over the past 15 years, the percentage of cases that involve females in terms of, in all delinquency cases, and person offenses, which again are usually of most concern, person offenses involving robbery, assault, and any person-to-person attack with a weapon, etc. We can see the female percentage of cases have increased over time in the juvenile courts about 10%, from 20 to 30% over time. And part of that, the explanation for that is that with the male crime rate declining and the female crime rate for some offenses staying the same or increasing, in one of the slides before, simple assaults, you can go back and see later that simple assaults for females actually increased in the past few years. So naturally, then, females are making up more of the cases that go through the system, and so you're seeing that more in juvenile court cases as well. And okay, why is that important? Because we want to, as Angie talked about it, in the products and services and what all of you are involved in, if more females are showing up into the system, then we have to have services and programs that are gender sensitive, if not gender specific, in the system, so we can address females and delinquency, crime, and specifically for us, gang membership, more effectively. In how we predict someone joins a gang is one of the ways we use is a public health model, which looks at the individual and then what surrounds that individual, what impacts that individual's life, which of course, and there's 4 other groups, which we call domains, outside of the individual. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the risk factor approach. It's very popular, especially in the last 15 years. But the point I want to make about these is not only the family, school, peer, but they each have a greater impact at different points in the individual's life. Like early in the life, the family's important, and then elementary age is in the school becomes more important, and then especially during adolescent phase, which is what I assume we're all in the juvenile justice field for, is the peer factor, the influence of other youth on youth. And in fact, peer associations is one of the best explanatory variables we have in the entire field. But we also can't discount the community and what kind of conditions, especially socioeconomic, and the types of relationships to the community and within the community among adults, especially when you think about kids going to and from school in the inner cities, the kinds of neighborhoods they're walking through, the kinds of violent actions they see, the desensitization, desensitization to that. These are all factors that we have to think about, and not just an individual when we want to come up with services and programs in a comprehensive way. So our
next poll question.
Yes, is
it going to come up, Michelle?
We had a poll question
There
about, so these risk factors.
Read out the poll question. Or I'll read it out. By and large, are the risk factors for gang membership dramatically different for males and females?
And this is one of those, in your experience, do you see an overlap between the factors that, generally speaking, that contribute to male and female delinquency, and in our case, female and male gang membership? And I can imagine that these might end up being split, because when you're looking at the gender side, there are issues that come through, and this does circle around to what one of the earlier questions is about. Some of the things we specifically see in female gang membership stems from ethnographic research and qualitative research from, like, Joan Moore in California, who looked at female gang members over time, Jody Miller in St. Louis, and Columbus, Ohio, and she found that, yes, these risk factor domains greatly impact gang membership and overlap, but some of the unique experiences of the females being abused in the home, whether it be physical, sexual, often propelled the girls to either run away, join a gang, and so what they saw, for them, that was a natural decision to make, to get away from the abuse they were experiencing. And so they saw the gang to them as a part, as more like a family, a place of protection, with the sad irony that once you join a gang, and I'm speaking from the statistical side now, once you join a gang, your chances of victimization go up dramatically. And I'm seeing from the poll question that, yes, people are split on this. And the significant overlap between females and risk factors for both females and males in gang membership, there is a significant overlap. When you look at individual across the risk factors and also the domains, and in one study, and I could have, we could have put together a lot of studies, but I wanted to focus on a recent one that uses the GREAT data, and that's by Finn Esbenson, and his book Youth Violence, which I thought would also be a good resource for everyone, and we have a link to it at the end, or at least a citation to it. And because it covers not only just gang membership, which is our focus, but I'm sure you have a larger focus with gender. There's chapters on gender, race, ethnicity, gang membership, violence, victimization. I mean, the concerns that all of us have in the field. And back to what they found on gang membership was that they found 10 risk factors for males, 11 risk factors for females, and they measured a whole host of them. But that most of the risk factors that were significant were found to be significant for both males and females. There were few differences, few male-specific or female-specific risk factors that they could find. But what they did note is that when someone joins a gang, whether it be male, female, it impacts their attitudes immediately. And that even if they left the gang a year or two later, some even more recent research within the past year by Chris Meldy, who uses the GREAT data, and Finn Esbenson, And they look at, even after a kid joins a gang, even after a short period of time, that can have long-lasting impacts, not on the transitions to adulthood, like I was mentioning earlier, but also on delinquency levels. So if they're something about the gang, when they join that gang, it creates a very negative outlook on a successful transition. And their delinquency levels stay elevated for longer than if the kid didn't join a gang. And of course, the more involved you're in delinquency, the more you get picked up into the system that we're all involved in. And one of the other findings that we're showing from risk factor research is that the domains, it's not just this list of risk factors, it's that when a kid comes from an area that, in their life of the 5 domains, individual, self, peer, when all of these domains, they're suffering risk across the board, they are 10, 20 times, I don't even remember the exact number, it's so high that you don't even need to remember the exact number. The risk of joining a gang, the risk of being involved in delinquency is exponential. And again, with survey research, we can only, we're just beginning to look for differences between males and females. And when I say just begin, that's within the last decade. Some of the earliest risk factor studies did not find a lot of differences. And of course, that doesn't mean the differences don't exist. It's just we haven't measured for them yet and accumulated enough knowledge over time. But one study did find 3 unique variables. And one of those is called use of neutralizations, meaning that once they joined a gang or immediately preceding joining a gang, the attitudes, again, toward crime shifted, which sort of frees up a person to make what we would call bad decisions, joining a gang, committing a crime. And then the last 2 risk factors that were specific to females goes back to what Angie was talking about, the school arena. The risk factor research hasn't really shown a family dimension for females specifically for gang membership, but it definitely has shown a school domain risk, that commitment to school, involvement in school activities, performance in school, seeing limited educational opportunities. If it seems from the research, what the research is saying is that girls who don't really have a very positive outlook on their educational opportunities throughout the schools in their area or beyond, they are more likely to become involved in gangs and commit crime. In fact, one of the kids I interviewed when I was a graduate student in St. Louis, I remember one of his responses to what he was going to do after he got out of high school, and he said, "I probably won't even be alive long enough to know that answer to that." And that was a very poignant moment for me. In terms of programmatic responses for gangs, we drew 2 quotes out from the research literature that discusses this, and they're kind of juxtaposed. One is that we really don't know enough yet. We're just accumulating enough empirical knowledge to talk about female versus male direct program specialization. So the data is insufficient, but as Dana Peterson says, there is cause to recommend gender-specific elements in the gang issue. No, Mike. And turn the volume.
Are you back? Are you back? Are you back?
We can hear you just fine.
Hello?
Just keep talking.
Turn yours up.
Arlen, I can hear you just fine. Keep talking.
It is. Is everyone there?
I don't know what happened.
Is it on? Volume?
Is everyone there? It just went on.
Oh, good. They hear it.
Okay, good.
I'm sorry. There was a problem with my laptop, and so now I'm speaking on Nina's laptop. So I'm going to turn it over back to Nina because she had a couple of comments.
Right. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay, I just wanted to point out that on our website, nationalgangcenter.com, we have a strategic planning tool with programs, a program matrix, and under there we have gender-specific programming where we talk about the different intervention and prevention for ages 6 to 17, risk factors, and all the different risk factors, individual, family, school, community, and peer. And in there we give a description of the promising programs that are specific, gender-specific programming. And that about wraps it up. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, National Gang Center, for a great presentation, lots of information. A few questions that have come in for you all, if you wouldn't mind responding to them. We only have about 6 minutes left till the end of our event here, but we do want to get a couple of questions in. Someone has asked the question, which I think is a great question. You talked about the negative impacts of gang involvement, but are there actually any benefits for girls being involved in gangs? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, I touched on that earlier a little bit, and it's kind of like distinguishing between and when I'm saying negative impacts, I'm talking about in terms of committing crime, in terms of being involved in criminal activity and victimization, especially for females, that impacts your life in the long term, not only in terms of your involvement in the criminal justice, juvenile justice system, but long term as well. But the benefits are more of the perception of what the gang can offer the youth, and usually that they're drawn to the gang because of something, these domains, this risk in their life. They're experiencing negative stimuli, they're experiencing negative events in their life, stressful life events, abuse, physical, sexual, mental, and so the gang offers the benefit in terms of providing sort of a family and camaraderie for them, but and that's from the individual's perspective. But from our perspective as programmers, we are trying to keep them out of the gang, and if short of that, then to keep them from being involved in criminal, in juvenile delinquency, and of course, naturally, we want to keep them from being victimized as well.
Okay, great. Dr. Lippman, do you have any additional comments about that? What are some of the things that you find that are being offered girls that pulls them into a gang family? Any 2 or 3 critical things?
Sure. We've done some interviews with stakeholders we're doing a research study on girls and their desistance from gangs. And what we're finding from direct service practitioners who work with girls in gangs is that oftentimes these girls are joining gangs for family and support, and that's a big draw for them. And I agree with Arlen that potentially this increases their chances of delinquency, of course. But I think that it's serving something for them. And many girls describe it as a home that they didn't have, and so they're joining this kind of second home. So that's what we're kind of hearing from different professionals who are working with gangs.
Okay, one other question that was asked is, are the female cases less likely to be diverted away from court? Arlen, Mina, can you respond to that, please? Are female cases less likely to be diverted away from court?
That's not something that I can respond to. It's a very interesting question, but I haven't looked at the statistics on that.
I would say just by virtue that most of the serious cases are still male dominated, that the females cases would naturally be more, the outcome would more be diversion, out of place, aftercare, not detention placement. But I guess it remains to be seen with the rise in the percentage of cases involving females in juvenile court, what the dispositions are for those. I do not know any statistics, but if you look at the sites I provide that we provide on the slides, these are great resources. OJJDP has a statistics tool that links to BJS, Uniform Crime Reports, and Juvenile Crime Court statistics. And I would recommend Melissa Sickman at the National Juvenile Justice Center. She would probably have information or data about that.
Thank you, Arlen and Mina. Here's another question. Are girls more likely to leave gangs because they are allowed to leave without repercussions?
That's a great question, but there are actually two parts to that question you're asking. Is that presumes that males can leave the gang without repercussion, and or cannot. And actually, the research shows that many times, especially in cities with less organized gangs, and less generational gangs, meaning the few cities, the dozen cities across the United States that have a gang problem for over 100 years, they have more organized gangs. They have more of a structure. So it remains to be seen how much of a difference we can attribute. But in these newer gang problem areas, even males can leave without repercussions. They join a gang, they leave a gang. But of course, that can mean two different things. That they can say they're no longer a gang member, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the rival gang in that area knows this. It's not like they notify them. And so they could be treated still as a gang member. They could be targeted for violence as a rival gang member, which can, of course, naturally feed back into the youth joining the gang again. So it's not a static process. It's very dynamic. And it can take much more than an individual's personal decision to leave the gang to actually leave the gang.
And also remember, it's not so much gang membership, it's involvement in the gang. So a girl may not be a gang member, but she may be a girlfriend or a wife of, and therefore be involved in that circle of activity without actually being a member.
As you can see, we were trying to be so thoughtful of your time, it being a Friday, knowing how busy each of you all are. So we devoted 1 hour. I recognize it's 3:01. I want to take this opportunity to thank the National Gang Center as well as the National Girls Institute for joining us, as well as all of you. You can see that there are some websites here that are available to you for additional information. This will also be archived, as you know, at www.ntac.org in approximately 2 weeks, in case there are other colleagues that were not able to participate today that may be interested in hearing this conversation. And then, of course, as always, we always appreciate your feedback and want to know if there are other ways that we can provide support to you in any way. Please, you can access this evaluation link right now. If for some reason you can't access it live, please copy and paste that into your web browser and give us your feedback. Let us know if this was helpful, if you've learned something new, and more importantly, if there's some other topics that you would like us to host on your behalf as a part of the OJJDP Training and Technical Assistance Network. Again, it's Friday. We certainly appreciate you spending time with us. We hope you each have a safe and joyful weekend. Angie, Arlen, and Mina, hats off to the three of you. Couldn't have done it without you. Thanks for joining us today. OJJDP, we certainly appreciate all the support that you provide us.
Thank you all for being with us. See you next time.
Thanks.